Hello and welcome back to this video, and this is part 2 of the survivorship bias. Again, this is not a standalone, so if you haven't watched the first part, I would definitely recommend you to watch the first one. And I finished actually doing a recap, and I'm actually going to start with the same recap. So basically, I was describing how difficult it is for our brain to recognize new information. That's why we tend to have a bias towards information that we can easily recognize, and that is also what creates this imbalance in the way that we select information. And then due to that selection, we end up with a partial data that gives us some conclusions. And thanks to those conclusions, we might actually give some answers to certain problems without actually thinking if those are the best answers that we can give. And the neurotransmitter dopamine, I discussed that, makes us pursue a particular path to achieve a goal. And once we achieve the goal, we feel a rush of serotonin, the feel-good neurotransmitter that was discussing. This factor alone, again, conditions certain type of behaviors. Since we have, that need of feeling safe and looking for safety, we constantly look for information and people that confirms our point of view. That's when I discuss the influence of confirmation bias to that survivorship bias. And then, again, I want to make sure that we understand that these are not the same things. Yes, they're both selective bias in the sense that they both pre-select information, but the difference between one and the other one is that confirmation bias has a purpose of confirm your preconceived ideas, while the survivorship bias is just a selection of information, not necessarily to confirm your preconceived ideas. And then I also talk about the influence of the group. We will discuss more about the group today and how the group and the group that you're part of, your culture, equates hard work with success. Again, the logical conclusion when someone is not successful would be that their lack of hard work is what provokes them not to be successful. And since that is a powerful belief, and that is a powerful one that is very difficult to change and to challenge, facing negative consequences, is very difficult for us to even try to change those ideas. So that's pretty much how we end up the last video. So now I wanted to start this video with, the recap, with how we perceive others, because so far what we have described is from our own point of view, looking at the individual. And yes, I introduced that idea of the group, but what happens with the concept of the others, how we perceive others? So it is clear, again, how we perceive ourselves to be more competent. That was pretty much the first slide, what I tried to talk about in the first slide. I also discussed that in the Dunning-Kruger effect video, that already gives us a one-sided version of reality. Again, that idea of perceiving ourselves as better or more competent. But it gets worse once we compare ourselves with others, especially when we apply our own filters to others, meaning we have not only filters that we apply to the way that we perceive things that affect us in a way in which we tend to see ourselves as a more positive or under a positive light. But sometimes we apply certain filters or certain biases in the way that we perceive others. With the first example, I tried to illustrate how after an accident, the person who survived attributed everything leading to the success, meaning the survival of that accident to their own skills, ignoring other potential factors, for example, the quality of the roads, the design of the car, the other person's reactions and skills, etc. In that case, we make a selection of the information we were exposed to. Again, everything that we have discussed so far has to do with that idea of how we select information, how we gather information and select that information. And yes, those are two different processes. The first has to do with our capacity to actually look for certain information, meaning to gather that information. And the second one has to do with the process of selection or selecting information. But this also happens when we analyze other people's behaviors, reactions, etc. We tend to make snap judgments. Remember that those snap judgments is when we use our system one. Utilize information that is available to us, meaning what is easily available to us, the things that we already understand, the things that we already know. Because again, our brain is lazy in that way, meaning it has a an easier time at dealing with information that is being already available to us, meaning information that we already have, information that our brain can process already, than the information that is new to us. And I also talk about the limited capacity of dealing with information in general. And if you put everything together, if you combine those processes with the fact that, again, we have a limited capacity to analyze new information, and on top of that, that when we feel pressure, when we feel anxious, we tend to simplify things even more. You can start seeing how that system one can actually produce a lot of the skewed that we endure. Now, we make assessments based on that already skewed information, and worse, we tend to give solutions without even thinking if our assessments were correct. As you can see, our biases play an important role in how we view others and how we behave towards others. I really wanted to emphasize that, because it's not only that you're a passive person just judging other people, it's based on that judgment you're going to behave in certain ways. Like, for example, if the person is not successful and our culture suggests that working hard equals success, we will impose that reality, that what I believe the reality to be, that's nothing more than a belief, onto others, and we will make judgments about their behaviors and their results. But then, and this is the important part, we will reach conclusions and we will even try to find a solution for that particular problem. Sometimes we might help, but might not give the right type of help that the person needs. We might try to impose certain behavior, certain beliefs into the person's beliefs because we don't believe that the person is being right or even reasonable. And also other examples, if sometimes that is not successful, even without trying, we might actually not hang out with those people or not consider them as worthy of a particular job. So you can see, especially in these last two examples, not hanging out with them, not sharing anything with them, or not even considering worthy of a job, or being embarrassed about how we perceive them, being embarrassed about them. That furthers the gap between the people who have and those who have not, or those who don't have. Now, before we continue, I wanted to emphasize again the weight of the culture and the culture's values in the way that we interpret situations and how we behave accordingly. So there are, of course, cultures in which success equals something else, especially when we talk about the economic success. That idea that a person with money must be corrupted, cold-hearted, entitled, and everything was given to them, like they didn't even deserve what they had. That is actually prevalent in some other cultures. That, of course, is another example of selective bias, meaning they're selecting certain information to, and in this case, yes, confirm a preconceived idea. So in this case, that is actually a form of confirmation bias. But again, that doesn't mean that there are no entitled, corrupted, and even cold-hearted people among the richest of the richest. Sometimes you can even find all of the above that I just said in one person, which is amazing. But the thought of that being a must in order for you to be rich, or in order for you to be a successful person, economically speaking again, is a form of bias as well. And ironically, the same form of bias that people who judge poor people for being lazy apply. So as you can see, it's not only necessary something that we do in a sense, and it's not only necessary that we justify our success and apply those biases to judging others and judging our success. It's not only that we apply the same bias just specifically to that. As you can see, there are examples of other people judging us for the opposite, and that is the same type of bias. Social media and a new contribution to the problem. I feel a little bit bad because I feel like every time, that I have spoken here about social media, it's always in a negative light. I don't always want to sound negative because there's plenty of reasons why people would want to join social media. And sometimes there might be some positive elements to joining social media. Although I'm struggling to see what the benefits against cost. But again, for example, being able to connect with people from other places, reconnect with some old friends that you haven't spoken to in a long time, But again, since I'm talking about survivorship bias, I can't continue without actually addressing the elephant in the room, which is social media and how that affects the survivorship bias and the perpetuation of those ideas. Now, social media is full of people that would not shy away of telling you how or selling you their secret to success, right? That's how they make their living. There's a high incentive to do it, to tell you how they did it. Unfortunately, their secret to success is just in the selling of the secret to success. That means that there's nothing else behind that. But since they have to protect how they make money, they would definitely have an enormous incentive, as I said before, to continue preaching what they have to preach. Most of these people have an enormous, incentive, but also seem to use a similar recipe. And that recipe is like, I was like you. I was broke. I was in the place that you are right now. Work super hard, and then also they have a combination of that in a secret formula to success. The first portion is just to appeal, obviously, to the people who believe in hard work, which is, most people, especially those people who are already working hard, which is a paradox, right? Because you would believe that the people who are working hard and they're not succeeding probably would be the ones who believe in the system the most, but that is the paradox. That is exactly the opposite. And again, there's some interesting psychological explanations for that. There's one effect in which the more you spend time doing something, the more you are willing to continue because you already have spent the time doing that. That is the same example that I gave you in the other video when I was talking about the video game, in which you're not doing that just because you're enjoying. At some point, if you have repeated the same level over and over and over again, you're doing out of spite, like you are actually not enjoying anymore, but you have spent so much time that it kind of feels bad that you have achieved nothing. And that is a trap. But now that I was talking about like this idea of social media, and I was talking about how that can be appealing to certain people, and how that idea of working hard is appealing to the hardworking people. The second part of the recipe, the secret to success, the secret formula, appeals to the part of our brain that is tired of working hard. The person who, the portion of the brain who really wants their results already. And even at some point, we believe that we deserve that those results. So that's one of the reasons why it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily something that you are tired. It's more of like you also deserve. You feel that you deserve that reward after working so hard. Now, these people alone would not, meaning the people who are trying to sell you their secret to success, would not get that idea that far by themselves. They definitely need they need someone. They couldn't do it without a solid base of acolytes that follow them and praise them. But why? Why is it that people, especially people who are broken, not broken, broke, although some people might be broken inside, why people are willing to give out their time and they will be willing to praise this type of people? Well, this is a very complex and complicated topic, and there's a complicated answer. I want to try to summarize what I believe. Now, people are attracted to successful people, and they want to be like them. Again, they want to experience what they see or they perceive of others. So obviously, if I see someone being rich, I would want to be like that person. So I would try to imitate that person, just try to see if I can get the same results. So they want to also appeal to them. They think that there might be a chance that they might connect with them, meaning with the rich people, with the people who are selling these somehow by commenting, for example, positively about a person's post or video, etc. There's also another group of people who might be desperate and are looking for some answers. And when someone gives them an answer, and again, this has nothing to do with truth. It has nothing to do with the reality. It has to do with how a communicator, a person can communicate effectively about their possibility of the possibility of success for others. So if you can communicate that, and then the other person believe you, the person's going to fall for that, because what we're looking for again is not safety. Remember, our conversation about from an anthropological point of view, how we are not looking for safety. We're looking for the feeling of being safe, which is a totally different thing. So again, when someone appears and give them an answer that might move them out of their desperate situation, they will believe them. Like when our ancestors again had to face enormous challenges and attach attached to the first beliefs that gave them a sense of safety. Again, we're not looking for safety. We're looking for things that makes us feel safe. As discussed in another video, this is a form of groupthink, meaning we're creating that idea that person is successful, and then those acolytes that I was discussing before now share certain beliefs with the person who is telling them how to act, and then how sometimes one thing that you can hear them saying is that, well, people are full of excuses. If you really work hard, when you grind and you hustle, you will get it. All of that is part of a group think. Therefore, most people in this group are not only interested in protecting the beliefs of the group, but they will fight against whomever criticizes the beliefs. Remember that those beliefs are there for a reason. They are there to give certain answers to important questions. I'm not criticizing necessarily those beliefs for what they are. I'm not saying that they're not valid. I'm just saying that the reality is, like, every time you have a group thing, every time you have group of people believe in certain things, there is a need for each individual part of the group to protect the beliefs of the group, because it's necessary for their own selfish well-being, if you will, because what they're looking for again is a sense of safety. And unfortunately or fortunately, those type of groupthink, or the groupthink, actually answers to certain questions that most people might need to feel comfortable, to feel safe. And as I have also tried to explain in other videos, it's very difficult for a person to endure the feeling of being lost. That's why it is so important to protect our beliefs. Again, same thing. If I deny certain beliefs, if I criticize certain beliefs and I don't substitute them for anything, what is going to happen? Because let's say that I really held this belief of, I don't know, you can tell about like politics or about religion. And if you remove them, if you remove those beliefs and there's nothing, you're going to feel lost. And that is not a great feeling. And most people will try to fight them. So as I explained in the video about groupthink and in-group bias, I also say that that is one of the reasons why you just don't attack, especially when you're talking and dealing with a group of people, you don't attack those beliefs unless that you have a substitution for those beliefs, unless that you can make the person feel better, even if the person loses that, especially when the person is going to lose a belief that, again, gives them comfort. So now that we have discussed, or I've discussed that importance of beliefs and why we have this tendency of protecting our beliefs, I wanted to talk about your cultures and your values. And I decided to title this, Your Culture's Values Are Yours. And I thought that this was interesting because having been raised in a totally different culture has given me an opportunity to see and observe certain behaviors here in the United States as an outsider. And also it has given me now the opportunity of looking at my own culture, the Spanish culture, from an outsider's perspective, and at least to look at things with a different lens, which I think that it has been very beneficial, hard sometimes, but beneficial as well. And there's one idea in particular that is very different in both countries, and that is the idea of work and money. There have been many times here in the United States that I've heard these or similar conversations to this, people talking about how everybody wants money and values ways to make more money, as if that was just a universal truth that everyone in the world shares. And although I agree that to a certain degree, most people want to have a comfortable life, I not only think that that is not a universal truth, I know that that is not a universal truth. I have met lots of people in Spain whose values about money and work are I wouldn't say necessarily the polar opposite, but very, very, very different in terms of money and work and what that represents. In fact, one of the most common phrases that I used to hear growing up, or common phrases that I used to hear growing up, not in my family, because my family was really hardworking. So maybe this video is more made for people like me than it is for other people. Again, one of the most common phrases that I heard growing up, where I just want to work enough to live a comfortable life, or I don't want to live to work, for example. That person must be screwing people because they're very rich. That person doesn't have anything other than money. Think about that for a second. Think about that phrase. That person does not have anything other than money. That is such a typical phrase that I used to hear, and it makes me kind of laugh for a reason, right? The reason being, it kind of suggests that the person in particular has nothing other than money, and it must be like that because that person has only money, has so much money that that's the only thing that it has. As you can see, there were some biases towards having money in Spain, but in the opposite direction. That is not necessarily good nor bad. I'm not criticizing also Spain for that. I'm not criticizing Spaniards or Spanish values, but it definitely reflects an important distinction. And I'm not even suggesting that all Spaniards share the same values. I'm just saying that that is something that I, growing up, heard not only around, not necessarily around me, meaning my family, definitely not, but friends, or definitely, yes, I heard that from friends, but even on TV, people would discuss that and then they would say things like that openly. But again, that is not necessarily good or bad, but it definitely reflects an important distinction between both countries in terms of how we perceive money and work. And that is an important point because your cultural values are yours. And I mean, not your values of your culture's values, not the entire thing. I'm just saying your values, like your values. We tend to confuse both because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel better that we share certain values with other people. That has to do with the in-group bias and the group thing more than in-group bias that I was discussing before. Because it gives you comfort. You are supported by a group of people who share certain values with you, and especially those about money and working. They're important because that literally makes, or you think that makes you who you are. So again, these might not be your culture's values, might be your own culture's values. But even if those are your culture's values, meaning the country that you're from values, that might not be a universal value, but just your own culture's values. So what I was trying to say before about like the important difference between Spain and the US, for example, in terms of work and money, how we perceive them, I think that shows that idea of how different we are in terms of valuing certain things and in terms of valuing value around not only what money is, but what money represents. And I think that here, a lot of people, since the US, for example, is so big, and I would argue that the behaviors and the values about money, in particular in the work, it's really working hard, is kind of like universal. That idea of having like one point of view in terms of value in work and money is actually not common in other places. For example, in Spain, you have people with extremely different values. There are communists and there's definitely socialists. In fact, my current president in Spain is part of the socialist political party. So you can imagine that, and obviously you have capitalists, and then you have the other side of the spectrum. But in that sense, you have a variety of people thinking differently. But even in a country like the United States, in which kind of like seems like it's like a similar or the same value in terms of work and money, you also have a diverse country, like people that comes literally from everywhere. So it is important to, understand that diversity can actually reflect on how other people here in the United States, or different people here in the United States, sees work and money as well. So you might encounter different values about the same subject, even within the United States. Now, next, I'm going to talk about the poor neighbor effect. And I know that I'm jumping really quickly from one subject to another, and I will try to connect everything at the end. So I'm trying to explain as much as I can what I have to explain in order for me to wrap up at the end. But again, if this seems not to be completely connected, although I'm trying really hard to connect everything that we are discussing so far, bear with me, because it all makes sense at the end once I started to connecting things and I started to wrap up. Now, the poor neighbor effect, or the poor neighborhood effect. And no, this is not the name of another bias. As I mentioned before in the videos related to the in-group bias and groupthink, growing up in a poor neighborhood might affect different areas of your life, from your personal development to your cognition. Now, I'm not the one suggesting that. Those are research that I actually named there. So I would advise you, if you are interested and you haven't watched that video, to go to the groupthink and the in-group bias. There I explain a little bit more. And I also introduced that idea of normalization that exists in any group. You normalize what you are around, you're surrounded by. So in that case, for example, in the case of being exposed to a large group of people who did not have the chance to go to college or to even finish high school, you kind of will normalize that idea of not finish high school, because that's what a lot of people, most people around you, are going to do. This effect, again, is not exclusive feature of the United States, because I keep hearing that idea of, well, these ideas related to race and how we treat certain people, like, for example, in the case of Black people, Latinos here in the United States, and that is a possible explanation. And I'm not denying that there's a component of that, but this effect of certain people, or certain areas not going to school and not finishing school, is actually not a phenomenon that only exists in the United States. And definitely in Spain, which pretty much we have the same culture. And I'm not saying that they're not different regions of Spain that think differently, but in terms of race, we're pretty much the same race. Growing up in Spain, I have observed the same effects on certain areas. For example, people that I have met whose parents or uncles or friends never finished high school were more prone to dropping out in school and start working earlier, and even starting work at odd jobs, because those are the only jobs that they had access to. That is despite the education being free. That means that there's no excuse of being expensive and not being able to afford it. And that is one of the main keys why people don't join it here in the United States, meaning the money obviously is a huge deterrent, because if you don't have the money, or if you're going to have to ask a bank for a loan that you have to pay no matter what, and then you don't know what your future is going to be, chances are that you're not going to join, or you're not even going to try to go to college, because that's literally a gamble here in the United States. Now, there's an important distinction, however, that has to do with the degree in which that phenomenon appears. And it is a big one. I'm not going to deny it. Nowadays in Spain, there's an enormous pressure to study and finish your higher education, and even college, like even master's degrees. Like I have three. I almost forgot about one. But it's because the pressure is there are simply no jobs. There's no jobs, mainly because, again, there are no jobs for everyone, and not having a degree is almost a synonym of being unemployed, because it's already hard enough to get a job, even among the people who already are educated. Here in the US, however, there are plenty of examples of people who can make it without a degree, simply because the market is a little more forgivable. That being said, I do believe that having a free or near free educational system increases the chances of people actually joining and finishing. It is just a matter of probability and not a possibility. As I said before, here in the United States, I think that the fact that everything is so expensive, higher education is so expensive, is a huge deterrent of people joining, or from people to join. And I'm not even going to pretend like the rate of higher education in Spain is much higher than it is here in the United States. The reason being that it's free or close to free. But again, you have to establish that even when something is free, that there is no guarantee that everyone is going to finish and everyone is going to do it at the same rate. And in fact, there are pockets of areas in which that doesn't happen. And again, that doesn't have to do with the it has to do with the socioeconomics, but it has to be with the normalization of certain behaviors. Now, everyone has the potential here in the United States to join and finish school, but there are reasons as to why not everyone does it. So what do you think? And this is something that I want you to think for a second. I would like you to think about the questions that I'm about to ask. And if you can, pause the video and take some time to answer them and see how you feel about this. Why do you think some people are not finishing their studies? Do you think that there are too many incentives, that people somehow has become complacent and lazy? Do you think some people just aren't smart enough? Or do you think there are too many obstacles that people face, like, for example, school being too expensive, a poor environment, excessive competitiveness, etc.? And what about other areas? Think about similar questions with other areas, and you can transport that to the work field. What about work? Do you think entrepreneurship is very hard, and that is a reason why most people don't want to do it? Do you think people are not tough enough? Or you think that the playing field is not even? You think that even by being exposed to certain type of people, you have more chances to be inspired? Do you think that rich people have it easier just because they have access to richer people with more connections? If you can dedicate some minutes to think about any of these questions and try to see which ones side a little more or resonate more with you, I want you to pause for a second and do that. Now, after you have done that, I want to explain the reason why this is actually called the survivorship bias. And I want to talk about the bombers, problem, or why the survivorship bias is so important. So, Abraham Wald was an important figure in World War II. If his name doesn't ring a bell, it's not familiar to you, don't worry. Most people have never heard of him. He was a Hungarian Jewish mathematician who worked at the University of Columbia. And although he worked in different fields of decision theory, geometry, etc., he's probably most known or most famous for having founded the field of statistical sequential analysis. And I know that you probably don't even know what that is, but probably his most important work was to minimize the damage against the bomber aircrafts. Now, during the height of World War II, the U.S. Army was concerned about the damage done to the bomber aircrafts. Most of these planes returned with many bullet holes, and they wanted to find the best way to protect those aircrafts. Because obviously, there's a limitation on the amount of the planes that they could produce, and obviously they couldn't afford to lose them. And obviously, by losing them, that would mean that getting close to losing the war. And there was a problem. The armors used to protect their aircrafts were too heavy. That meant that they had to select which places they were going to put those armors, those protections. In other words, what portions of the planes they needed to protect versus the portions of the planes would be okay, even if they were shot at. They did a first analysis, and the commanders actually thought that the best places to put the armor would be where the highest concentration of bullet holes were, thinking that those must be the place worth protecting the most, since those were the places where the enemies were shooting. So think about that. It kind of makes sense. You see all these bombers coming back and then having all these bullets or bullet holes in the same areas. You were thinking, well, those are the areas that the enemy is attacking, so those are the ones that we should protect. Sounds logical, right? Well, Abraham Wald seemed to disagree with you. He thought that the responses only were based on the presentation of the information that was given. That is, that they did not take into account all these airplanes that were not coming back because they were actually crashed or the people were killed. Also, the situation of focusing on the places with the highest concentration of bullet holes did not take into account the importance of those places. For example, can a place survive an attack in one area but not in another area? The fact that most of these airplanes that they were analyzed could actually return was proof that they actually could function even if they were being shot at those places. Had they followed their first and logical path, they would have lost more planes. So what are the areas we're not paying attention to? What are the areas that you think that we're not, that we're filtering that information and we're reaching conclusions even without actually understanding the problem and proposing ideas or solutions that actually do not correspond with reality? So I want to tell you that you are right and wrong at the same time. So 2 slides ago, I left you with some questions. Remember the questions that I was asking you about the, what are your thoughts about people not making it or not studying or people not being able to work hard or being able to work but not doing anything or not achieving anything. So I ask you those questions about your thoughts on education and work and why you thought some people seem to be successful while others don't, depending on how you already felt before you watch this video. You would naturally side with certain questions. That's why I said, which are the questions that you feel more connected with? Which are the questions that you actually feel better with? You probably feel that some questions were siding with you while the other questions seem a little bit too radical. This again depends on your preconceived ideas. The truth is that there are some valid points on both sides. For example, being rich will give you more opportunities to be exposed to other cultures, visit other countries, visit museums, have experiences with other people, again, from other cultures. And that has an effect on your development as a person and also will give you access to other also wealthy people, not the fact of connecting with other people from other world, but having that openness to wealth will give you access to other wealthy people that might help you find a job. This point alone can already divide people. For example, some wealthy people might take offense to the statement because they might think that it takes from their hard work, like suggesting, well, you know, it's okay, but you were born rich, so, you know, you have more opportunities than the rest. However, other people might actually read the same statement and think that is offensive towards poor people, because it might suggest that the statement suggests that poor people are necessarily less developed. And as you can see, it's just a sentence that states the fact that you having more opportunities increases your chances of have more results. That statement can lead to 2 different reactions, and these different reactions can lead to a different understanding of what the problem is and how to solve it. All of these will depend on our own biases in the way we select the data. When looking at the problem of the wealth gap, for example, especially related to certain areas like or groups, understanding and gathering good data is crucial to understand the problem. So again, if we don't have a good data, if we don't understand what constitutes a good data, chances are that we are not processing the information properly. And definitely we are not going to be able to reach any conclusion that will be close to solving the problem. Maybe we will, but by accident rather than by using logic and reason. For example, the influence of money on everyday decisions. If you just take that alone, the compound effect of not having money, especially in a culture that values everything and where everything costs money and a lot of money, also how individualism can lead to certain feelings about helping others and the morality or immorality of taxation. All of that obviously has an influence in the way that we behave and also in the way that we behave towards others, in the way that other people perceive that behavior and how that influences the possibilities that they can have for themselves. So there's one other point that I wish to touch, and this is tough. And by the way, I have to confess, this is the reason why probably I almost didn't record this video. This is the component that I think it might be toxic, not because of what I say, it's because how it can be interpreted. And that is the influence of immigrants in this culture, and in this case, in the hustle culture in particular. Although as an immigrant myself, obviously I was not born here in the United States. I can testify that the idea that if you work hard, you could do anything, potentially, obviously, is potentially true. That is, again, you have the potentiality, meaning the capacity of doing that. That is why I said I could do anything. And it is also true that that is not a true statement for many people that I have met, meaning, yes, potentially that is true for everyone, the same way that everyone can actually go to the NBA, potentially, but that doesn't happen for everyone. And that is limited to certain people. I'm not saying, obviously, in comparing it one way and the other one, because I acknowledge that there's a difference between playing a basketball game in which pretty much you're required to have certain skills, and also to be, for example, an able body. Someone with a wheelchair will not be able to do that. So, no, in a sense, a person who is born with a wheelchair won't be able to join the NBA, maybe the special basketball team, but not definitely regular NBA. But at the same time, I'm trying to draw that parallelism between the potentiality of everyone who has an able body of joining the NBA and the reality of someone joining the NBA being very different. Because obviously, not everyone, even if you try hard and you train hard, will be able, because there's a limited capacity of and a limited amount of people that can actually join those teams. So again, that is not a true statement for many people that I have met, especially among the immigrant communities. So why is that idea so prevalent among the immigrant communities here in the United States? I must confess that I had doubts, again, of doing this section because of this, out of fear, again, of how this can be interpreted. But I think it is important. It's important because it kind of explains an important thing about how immigrants can actually contribute to that groupthink that I discussed before. Because without the groupthink, you might think, well, this is just my group and we believe this. But when you have a group of people who come from someplace else, you can use that concept of other people coming from other places, confirm my ideas about work and working hard and success. Then you can say, see, that's proof of it's not only about me, it's other people who think the same way. So historically, the United States has been a country of immigrants who wanted to better their lives. That was true then, and it's true even today. Immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Russia, China, again, at different times for different reasons. Now, most massive migrations have been due to a combination of wars and dictatorships, and the people who wanted, obviously, to escape them, and the economic wealth of the United States. So it's not only about the problems that dictatorships and wars and hunger can bring to other people. It's also that the United States seem to be doing much better. As I said before, that keeps being true today, although the countries have changed. I'm going to give you an example that's going to sound very strange. For example, when my father was little, and during General Franco's dictatorship in Spain, many Spaniards fled the country to better their lives. And believe it or not, some people actually took their families or they left by themselves to go to Cuba and Venezuela because of their economic wealth and opportunities. That was actually true. Even my father has told me stories about how Mexico was like the Hollywood of that time. Like all of these Mexican movies were coming out, and some of the influence that they had, the movies, the mariachis, was actually very popular at some point in Spain. Now, of course, today, no one in Spain thinks, I want to save all my money and I'm going to go to Caracas to open a restaurant, for example. As you can tell, the situation in Spain is very different. As part of the European Union, Spaniards can travel now to other countries within the EU and countries that have similar values in terms of work-life balance, for example, social benefits, etc. And what happened to Cuba and Venezuela? obviously, as you know, the situation has changed dramatically. It's definitely not the same. People from Cuba and Venezuela have escaped what is undoubtedly considered or are undoubtedly dictatorships. But those are not the only countries. Other countries, and for other reasons, people are fleeing, meaning there are other countries in the world that have very poor conditions, and people are fleeing, from those countries. Every day, people from Ecuador, El Salvador, Mexico, or even the Philippines are coming to the US for, among other, the economic opportunities. Now, why am I telling you all of this? And it's because I thought that this was an important point. So the same way people in Spain in the 60s and 70s, not 60s and 70s, 60 and 70 years ago, were getting out of the country because of their necessity, and they were fleeing to a different country to better the future. The situation has changed now. Most people in Spain have most of their needs met, meaning they definitely have a good work-life balance. They have universal healthcare. They don't have to pay for. I mean, they pay through their taxes, and education, and a pretty good life. Except the professional side, which I agree is a very, very problematic situation, especially for the future. I noticed that obviously, and I have to acknowledge that sense of privilege, because it's a very different situation from the people who need to come, for example, to the US from Ecuador, Salvador, Philippines, Mexico, because those are completely different situations. Now, for some people from those countries, again, the people that I just discussed, it is even a matter of life and death. Well, for example, for a Spaniard, it's just a matter of fulfilling a side of him or her. Like, I want to better myself. I want to get a better job, a better opportunity for myself, but I'm okay here. So, and I'm saying Spaniard because that's the example that I know, but I could say like pretty much almost every European country. As I mentioned before, we have different cultural values, not better, not worse. I'm not saying that one is particularly better or worse in one particular field. I'm just saying that we're just different. So migrating to the US from any of those countries mentioned before can be a different experience than the one for a person from the EU. For example, everyone carries his own personal biases and their own group's beliefs. A lot of people in the EU, for example, value a work-life balance over all things, meaning that's literally the most important thing. So things like month-paid vacation or universal healthcare or education are a must for most people in EU, since that's what they already have in their countries. That's what they're used to. So when evaluating the possibility of coming to the United States, that is the situation they compare with. On the other hand, a person who comes from, for example, the Philippines or Ecuador will value work and economic opportunities more because, again, that concept of universal healthcare or education might not exist in the same way that exists in Spain, although I think the education in the Philippines is pretty much free or close to free. For a group, for example, working will be a way, for one group, for one of these groups, working will be a way to pay their bills and enjoy life. That's, for example, for a lot of Spaniards, they are looking for a way for them to pay bills, but, not to work to kill yourself, but literally just to have a comfortable life. For another group, working hard is a part of life, and that is actually a must. As you can see, this is a pre-selection of the type of people who come to the United States, ignoring the other majority of people who did not come to the United States, like, for example, in the example of World War II, when people ignore the planes that did not make it back. Now, final recap. As I said before, hopefully with this, I will try to make sense of everything that I have discussed in both videos. Individually, we're conditioned to hold certain beliefs. Beliefs are based on our experiences and what we interpret from other people's experience. Again, what we interpret from other people's experiences, not from other people's experiences, because we don't know what they experience. We just have a belief of what they experience. Collectively, as part of a group, we tend to protect the beliefs of a group. Our families, friends, neighbors, influence the way we perceive and interpret our experiences. Some of our biases are inherited by the group. There's a disproportionate incentive to protect our group's beliefs. We have discussed this at length. We have discussed this in the sense of how important it is for us to protect our beliefs, because being part of a group has enormous advantages from support from the group that I get, having answers to problems that I don't have to figure out myself, that I can easily ask to other people, or experiences that I don't have in certain fields that might be useful for me. Again, those are too many benefits that you can get from belonging to a group. The idea of working hard equals success, and the opposite, the lack of success equals laziness, is still prevalent in our society. When an idea like that gives you or gives so much meaning to other people who believe that they are who they are, where they are at in life because of their hard work, that idea not only represents, again, the idea more than just one belief. It's not only the belief itself, it is a confirmation that what they're doing is okay, that they're actually going on the right path. They're actually doing a good job. As you can see, it gives them a sense of control, and it also becomes part of their identity. When an entire country, like in the case of the United States, that idea of working hard equals success is so prevalent, the idea becomes an identity, and it is part of who we are. That idea of meritocracy is reinforced by comparison with other countries, where regardless of how hard work, for example, you are, or how hard you work in certain areas, you're never going to move up, or it is difficult to climb the social ladder. Again, there are countries in which that is very, very difficult, and it is true, because of the lack of resources of those countries, the political systems that keep people poor, cultural ideas, etc. And it is precisely when people escape from those countries and come to the United States where those people become a testimony against those systems, a proof that those systems don't work. They themselves embrace the US's beliefs because they are now part of a group that allows them to grow, flourish, and achieve more things that they achieved in their countries. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. It's actually good. It's actually proved that this system works for some people. The only fallacy is to think that that is the only way of being successful based on the data that you have. The same way that the first analysis about the bombers led people believe that the best places to protect their planes were those with the highest concentration of bullet holes. The idea of, well, I made it here and I didn't make it in my country, this is the only system where it can work, is that, well, you didn't go, for example, to Switzerland, or you didn't emigrate to Germany, you didn't go to France. Maybe you had gone, if you had gone to those places, you would have succeeded anyway. And those have completely different political systems. So again, that idea of because I made it and I came here and I work hard and I succeeded, is confirming the idea of working hard equals success that people have here in the United States. Now, possible solutions, as always, the toughest part. And I was prepared to actually be positive about that. I was prepared to offer you what I consider might be good beginnings, at least to start. I was going to remind you about the possible solutions that I offer you when talking about the in-group bias, very similar to what we're discussing. I was even going to talk about Professor Dunning's ideas on teaching logic and math skills to people, and then how that can kind of calibrate their perception on themselves and question certain ideas, and how that affects people's perceptions about the reality. But the reality is that this is more complicated than that. See, the problem with the survivorship bias is that it touches in the realm of identity. So this is something that most people will resist, because you either believe that working hard equals success or not. But if you believe in it, this is probably part of your identity. It is part of who you are. You have formed that idea based on your own experiences, and the idea gives you comfort. So attempting to remove that, especially if I don't offer you, if you are not given an alternative that can compensate for the loss of that comfortable feeling, that comfortable belief, will be unsuccessful. It's just not going to work. You're going to receive and you're not going to accept. You're not going to hear. You're going to debunk whatever is being said because it's not useful for you. It's too much. I, however, think that it can be possible for someone to change that aspect. Unfortunately, and this is also why I'm a little bit negative about this, most examples that I can think of are examples of people who have lost a lot. So a person, for example, who loses a fortune that can get back up, a person with a sudden and crippling injury that makes that person confront that idea of working hard and how the conditions that, or the new conditions that a person has can define how the person lives. So all of that obviously are very traumatic events, but definitely can actually work, quote unquote, work in a way that any rationality that I'm going to present to you is not going to work. Now, obviously, you don't have to wish anybody, if you want to change someone, you don't have to wish them to lose a leg or, become blind. Obviously, that's horrible. But there's one way in which you can actually approach this subject. This can actually be very hard, but it can even get harder when you have to work with others and convince others of this fallacy, meaning the fallacy of working hard equals success. And the only thing that I can think of is to think about it from an extremely rational point of view. And I know that what I'm going to say is the silliest thing that you can hear, but sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones, right? So is working hard and achieving success the same thing? Just ask the question. Is working hard, literally working hard and achieving success the exact same thing? The answer is obviously no, and it cannot be. It just literally cannot be the same thing, because working hard implies dedicating time, working through your emotions, persisting despite your circumstances. And achieving success is just getting results. It's about getting results. So if you put both things, it's even more clear that they're not related. Sometimes they coincide. I'm not denying that sometimes that is, not sometimes, it's almost a requisite for you to become successful, but that is not a condition. Why? As you can see, those are not the same thing. They're circumstances in which a person can get results with way less effort. And there are plenty of circumstances where I can think of where, despite someone's effort, enthusiasm, results are simply not met. And that is just a reality. So again, that is the only thing that I can think of from a logical point of view. And this is extremely hard because, again, this is going to appear as part of a cultural or an in-group or groupthink, if you want to define it a little bit more properly. So as part of a group, you're going to have a harder time, especially when you combine that groupthink with an identity and how that forms part of a group identity. So I wanted to finish this with confessing one thing. I am a hypocrite because I actually believe in working hard. So when I was making this video, I was actually cringing because what I'm trying to do and what I try to do this might sound like I'm trying to debunk that idea. And I've been trying to work really hard against my first instinct, which is trying to criticize that, because I myself, I believe in working hard. So I have to confess that, because I might be biased in the opposite way. I might be biased in the way of not including certain information, maybe obviously because of the length. I wanted to condense as much as I could, but maybe that played an important role in how I approach this. But I know there's going to, again, sound such a contradiction, but I'm a believer in hard work. So this is, again, not an attack on hard work, but objectively, from a logical point of view, I cannot conclude that those two things are a must. And in fact, the reality that I have encountered here in the United States, as I said before, I came from a different background, from a different culture with different cultural values, and I believe certain things until I came here. And I cannot escape certain realities of having met certain people with 3 jobs that could barely make it. Working hard is not their problem. It's just that they didn't simply have access to better people who could help them. As simple as that. Or their network was very condensed by the same group of people who have similar situations. Then having to take care of kids and a mother at the same time and not being able to keep up and being in that vicious cycle. So that I cannot ignore that reality, because that reality exists the same way that there is a certain reality behind the differences between races here in the United States, inherited probably by centuries of slavery that have led to people having different conditions. And maybe that's something that will be eliminated over time, but right now there's still a gap. Although I'm not agreeing, as I said before, 100% with that idea of racism having to do with that today, although the effect of racism from the past definitely has an impact on how people are living their lives nowadays. So again, I wanted to clarify those things because, again, I didn't want to come out as one side or the other one. As usual, this is a tool for self-reflection. I know that the first instinct, especially with talking about survivorship bias, since this is so prevalent in a group or part of a groupthink, it's very difficult for you to look at it from your individual point of view because you're part of a society that already has that idea. And if you want to make any changes, we actually need to address that from a cultural point of view and from a groupthink point of view, rather than focusing on just an individual. But as I usually say, it's very difficult to try to convince someone and to prove or try to prove them wrong, because the first that you're going to encounter is an enormous resistance. So again, this is just a tool for self-reflection. As usual, if you find this useful, I would encourage you to share with other people. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this is useful, and I see you in the next video. Thank you so much.